Yo, what's going on, guys? We're back here today doing a crazy debate of the top 10 Denver Nuggets of all time after they just won the championship. And who better to do this with than the Nuggets fan himself, my guy, Willie G. How you doing today?
I'm good, brother. Always a pleasure to be on, talk some hoops with you. How you doing, man?
Doing pretty good. We've collabed a few times since the last debate we did, but it's been a while since we did that that Embiid Jokic debate. So
Yeah.
it's gonna be good to see where we align today. So we do have honorable mentions as well, and we're going to start with that. So I'm gonna throw you the floor first. Give me your choices for honorable mentions. Who just missed the cut as a top 10 Denver Nugget?
Man, ever since we started talking about doing this, I kid you not, man, I've been going back and forth. Who's top 10 honorable mentions, and I flipped a lot. I think my first honorable mention is Andre Miller. I think he's probably the best player to never make an All-Star game. When you see the stats that he put up, both with the Nuggets and Philadelphia, even with his Blazers days, he should have had at least one or two All-Star games in there. But he's top four, I believe, all time in Nuggets assists. Was a part of the era that ushered in Carmelo Anthony, and then even transitioned a little bit to the Brian Shaw, Danilo Gallinari, Nikola Jokic era, even, towards his later years with the Nuggets. I can go on and on about Andre Miller, but since he's an honorable mention, I'm not going to touch him too much. But I think he's my first honorable mention that you can make the debate for him being a top 10 Nugget. My next guy, and this guy probably was a little bit more of a possibility to be top 10. Might even be a little bit not problematic, but at least a conversation starter, would be the Rooster, Danilo Gallinari. A lot of people don't think he might have had a great career he has a great career. He's still in the NBA today, right? So obviously he's still an NBA caliber player. But people forget that he was probably the biggest trade piece that the Nuggets got when they traded Carmelo Anthony to the Knicks, back in 2011. And I remember his first game was against the Celtics. He laid out a stinker. I think he had like 6 points in his Nugget debut. People are like, they traded, an all-star, all-NBA player for this guy. Obviously, he was just, young, up and coming. And then he bounced back. But I think it's weird to say, looking back at this, but if he never tears his ACL in 2013, I think the Nuggets maybe win a champion. Maybe. Depends what happens. I think they were a dark horse that season. They were the fast-paced team in the league that year. Of course, he tears his ACL against the Mavs, and then, history just changed. And I say history just changes because even if they don't win a championship that year, or if they don't build up to win a championship, I guarantee you Andre Iguodala doesn't leave the Nuggets to go join the Warriors and become the dynasty. So people forget about that impact that Danilo's ACL had on NBA history. I think the Warriors still would have won a ring or two, but I don't think they become the dynasty that they became with Iggy. He definitely helped them get that next step. And then once he came back from his ACL, him and Ty Lawson probably went back and forth a little bit for the best player on that team. But definitely on his later years with the Nuggets, before they signed, Paul Millsap, he kind of ushered the way in for Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, Emmanuel Mudiay, those young guys that the Nuggets eventually, built their team around.
I definitely like that pick, mainly because Gallinari is probably my favorite Nugget ever. If we were doing the top 10 favorite Nuggets, he'd probably be number one. As for on an all-time list, I don't at least have him in my honorable mention spot. I did have two as well, just like yourself. And one of the guys, I had to put him here. It was not as close as being in my top 10, but mainly just because of how long he was with the team in the ABA. And that's why I couldn't really put him in the top 10, mainly just because of what he did in the ABA. And also, he did have kind of some stinker years, but he was around the team for a long time. And when he was at his best, he was an all-star caliber player. So I put Byron Beck as an honorable mention. It's a little bit tougher for me, I guess, give him the same credit, just because like when we're thinking about like on an all-time list for the NBA, like most of the stuff he did was prior to that. I think he only played like 1 year with the Nuggets in the NBA, and it was like by far probably his worst season of his career. So other than that, though, he was one of the better like rebounders in the league at the time, and a solid defender as well. So I got to give him that credit. And another guy that I really was more tempted to put in the top 10, he did play as well, partly with the Nuggets in the ABA, but he was also really good for them in the NBA. as soon as they came over. And some have even said maybe he's the best, forward defender that the Nuggets have ever seen, or at least one of them, and that is Bobby Jones. I think when we're talking about Bobby Jones, this is a proven champion, a proven winner. Obviously not with the Nuggets, but when we're thinking about just what he brings to the game, I think personally, like Bobby Jones, he's a guy that anyone would want on their team. And for me, like, he could rebound, he could pass the ball. He was kind of like a jack of all trades type of player. And he was with the team for only 4 seasons. So I guess like compared to like a Byron Beck or something, he doesn't have that. But every single season he was there, he was productive and he was effective. And you could argue the most important player on the team every single year he was playing for them. So those are my 2 honorable mentions. Mostly was kind of skeptical to put them in the top 10 just because most of their damage, or about half their damage they did with the Nuggets, was with the ABA. And it was a little bit conflicting. I didn't want to I guess stir the pot too much with that. But yeah, that's who I got for outside the top 10.
I mean, I agree with those. Bobby Jones is actually a sleeper. Like you mentioned, his Nugget career, I guess due to lack of success, maybe a lot of people don't realize that he was a Nugget with the Nuggets. But Byron Beck, I like him a lot. If I had to throw in another honorable mention, he'd probably be in there also. And I think you're probably right, though, just because the damage he did in the 10 seasons with the Nuggets, 9 of those were the ABA. Granted, 2 of them were the championship games right before the merge with the NBA. So, you can make that argument. But you're right. His success in the NBA was little to none with the Nuggets, just that one season. But I could see him. Being an honorable mention top 10 player as well,
Yeah, I think just the influence with it makes it harder, just because it was in the time of the merger and most of it was prior to that. But overall, I mean, I think, and yeah, I think so far everyone we got in there, this is interesting because we don't have anyone the same so far. But maybe you got either Bobby Jones or Byron Beck at number 10. What do you think for your number 10 spot?
So I don't have either of those at number 10. I actually have Denver's own Chauncey Billups at number 10. And honestly, you could say it weighs a little bit with him being Denver's own. He did have a first stint, I believe, in the early 2000s, I think 2002 to 2004 with the Nuggets. That was pretty forgettable. It was still when he was trying to find his place in the NBA. But I think what he did from when he was reacquired in 2008, the 2008-2009 season, up until he was traded with Carmelo to the Knicks, he comes in and people were saying that the Pistons won the Allen trade with Billups, saying that the Pistons got AI to continue their contendership, right? Looking back at it, the Nuggets were the clear winners, and who knows, maybe if Antonio McDyess sticks around instead of getting bought out and, eventually joining the Spurs, maybe they were able to take out the Lakers in the Western Conference in 2009. But just that immediate impact that Chauncey had on that team to get them from, bottom of the West, mediocrity, to legit contenders in, a few months, trailing only the Lakers in the West. And then, back in the following season, trailing the Lakers also, but only by 3 games as opposed to 10 at the end of the season, things like that. And if George Karl ever gets sick, with cancer again, who knows what could happen, right? A lot of what ifs, I think, circled the Chauncey Billups, Carmelo Nuggets. But with the Nuggets, right, like I said, he brings them in the contendership his first year. He was a 2-time All-Star, 1-time third All-NBA team. All part of that peak run to the Western Conference Finals in 2009. Just that floor general that the Nuggets needed. I think Carmelo grew up a lot with the Olympics team that summer, but Chauncey just helped, I guess, usher him into you're the man now. Sure, he was probably always the man in his time with Denver, Carmelo, but Chauncey just helped him grow up. I remember in the Western Conference semifinals against the Mavs in Game 5, I was actually out there, and it was the player introductions, right? And John Elway was doing the introductions. And I'm not much of a football guy myself, but we all know who John Elway is, right? Probably the greatest quarterback of all time, or at least, top 3, top 5 debatable. And I remember Chauncey was number 7 that season, and John Elway said, Denver, the new number 7, Chauncey Billups, right? When he's doing the introduction, just because of that impact that Chauncey had. So I think Chauncey would be number 10 on my list for top Nuggets.
Yeah, I like that choice. And I do like Chauncey as a player. However, I do not have Chauncey number 10 I do have someone that played around the same era, just a little bit before Chauncey was a Nugget. He did most of his damage with Denver, and he was teammates with Carmelo Anthony. But he was a center, and I'm going with Marcus Camby at number 10. I think even though he doesn't have quite the accolades, I know he was a defensive player of the year, like I think his last full season with the Denver Nuggets, but he was the block leader like half the time he was there, an elite rebounder. Like he was basically what we see out of like elite level rim protectors today. Like he basically had to fill that role, and he was there for almost like just short of a couple years short of a full decade with the team as well. And I think they wouldn't have been nearly as successful in those years without him. I think like, obviously they didn't get to the conference finals again until like 2009 with Chauncey and those guys, right? But still making the playoffs like from 2003 to like 2007, all 4 of those years. And I think one of those years he was like the rebounding leader in the playoffs, averaging like 15 a game or something like that. And then he was also like still leading the playoffs in blocks per game. I don't think you can understate just how important he was defensively, even if he wasn't quite the offensive threat that most of the guys on this list will be. I think he at least should probably be number 10 on my list. And especially like when we're talking about like comparing him and Bobby Jones, like, cause that's who my closest honorable mention probably was. I just think he was there a little bit longer, and basically every year he was there as well. Like he was giving them productive minutes all the time, always. So I'm going with Marcus Camby at my number 10.
I think Marcus Camby is a highly underrated player also,
Yeah. So I guess keeping it pushing here, moving on to number 9. What do you got?
Number 9 number 9 is Byron Beck for me. You already touched some points about Byron Beck. I mean, you already, talked about his allocates with the Nuggets and how most of them were with the ABA. But one thing that people forget about is that he's the first jersey to ever be retired by the Nuggets. He's the first jersey to ever get hanged up at that point, McNichols Arena, eventually Pepsi Center, and now Ball Arena. He was a top 5 rebounder, top 10 scorer. Sure, most of the damage was in the ABA, but, the Nuggets are one of those few teams that, after the merge happened, is still around today. So I still consider him, successful player with the Nuggets, because the franchise is still, one of the same. It'd be different if the Nuggets moved to another city and then came back to Denver or something like that, right? But since it's still the same franchise, same organization, the damage he did in the ABA, I still think it's enough to put him in the top 9 in this case.
Yeah, I like that pick. It's not too bad. So my number 9 is someone, he has not been said quite yet. He was only with the team for about 4 years. But I'm going to go with Kiki Vandeweghe at number 9. And I'm going with Kiki Vandeweghe mainly because, when you think about just straight up pure scores, and this is kind of, I guess, the anti-argument of the Marcus Camby, who is number 10, because I'm like, most of these guys above him are going to be elite offensive weapons too. And that's basically what Kiki Vandeweghe was. I mean, the guy averaged like roughly 30 points a game for multiple seasons, not even just with Denver, but throughout the whole NBA. But he did it multiple times as well with the Denver Nuggets. And when you think about the playoffs, I mean, yeah, he didn't have too much success, but he still played, I think, about 4 playoff series over 3 years. And he never really had like a bad series by any means. And I think he was a really efficient player. Probably early in that age of the NBA, like early 80s is when he played with the Denver Nuggets. And he was still probably one of the best jump shooters in the league at that point before. Like, imagine if you put Kiki Vandeweghe in today's age and how much he would be prioritizing the 3-point shot and stuff like that. Yeah. It would probably be a whole nother story. Like maybe that 27, 28 points a game is more so like a 31, 32 points a game or something like that. So I think all things considered, yeah, he might not be one of the most memorable Denver Nuggets in a sense, because it's like most NBA fans know who Kiki Vandeweghe is, but I guess he's not like one of those iconic level players that probably everyone else above him on my list is. However, I think you can't understate that, I don't know, he was just an elite bucket getter. And usually if you're averaging roughly 30 points a game for multiple years over that stretch, and even in the playoffs, if you're showing up, doing your thing as much as you can, I got to give you some credit. This was also around the time, too, that, like, the Lakers and the Celtics were basically running through the NBA. So I don't blame him for, like, not leading the Denver Nuggets to a championship when Showtime's, like, also in the conference. And then you also got, like, Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, and on the other side, you know what I mean? So I don't think that was ever the expectation, but give me Kiki Vandeweghe, number 9.
I respect it. Yeah, Kiki, honestly, he's not in my top 10 at all, so no spoilers there. Because like you mentioned, he is a name that you know if you follow the NBA even casually, but do you consider him in your all-time grades? Probably not, but, he is a guy who did a lot of damage, So, yeah, I respect that one.
So, moving on to number 8. I'm going to be excited when I share mine, but you go first. What is your number 8?
My number 8 is the Nuggets' probably best defensive player of all time, maybe. Marcus Camby, before Marcus Camby, Dikembe Mutombo. No. I think Dikembe, it sucks that he had such a short stint with the Nuggets, especially given how successful, in theory, he was with the Nuggets. Obviously, the upset against the Sonics, who can forget that iconic photo, right, when he gets that last rebound and he's laying on the floor with the ball in his hands. All-time block leader, top 5 in rebounds, an all-rookie player. And to do all this damage in only 5 seasons, I believe, obviously, when he left, I was, a toddler at that. I think at the end of the day, it was just money debates is the reason why he left. But, when Dikembe left the Nuggets, they became irrelevant, honestly, an irrelevant team after Dikembe left. So, just seeing the career that he had afterwards, obviously a Hall of Fame career, I think he's clearly top 8.
Yeah, and I'm looking down because my 7 and 8 were so close when I made this list, and I think I'm gonna make a late last minute change between my number 7 and number 8. I'll get to number 7 in a second, but my number 8, I got Fat Lafayette Lever at number 8. He was one of those guys that I think was kind of, again, similar to Bobby Jones in a sense, but from a point guard standpoint. A jack of all trades type of player. He could score, he could play make, he could rebound, he could defend. He could really do it all. And the thing for me is, I know he didn't have probably quite as much like high level success with Denver. He kind of came in, I guess, at a weird time. I know he played alongside a few other greats and one of them we're probably both going to name as we get on later in this list. But I think, he had a few solid years, but I just don't know if his impact is going to run quite as big with Denver as the guy I have number 7. Just moving forward, even though, Fat Lever, I don't know exactly where he is on the all-time triple-double list, but he's very high on there. And I bet aside from probably Jokic, he's probably the highest in Denver Nuggets history. I could be wrong on that, but just that should prove just how important he is as an all-around player. And he's one of the more underrated players too in I wouldn't say recent history, but probably since the modern draft era, since 1985. So I'm gonna give Fat Lever some credit here. I'm gonna put him at number 8. But yeah, I don't know. That's right.
And then I just want to clarify. You said you made the last one change right now in this position, right?
I had him originally at number 7. I'll get to my number 7 in a sec, but yeah.
So the reason why I asked is because my number 7 is Fat. I have Fat as my number 7 player. For all the reasons you just mentioned, I'll add this, small caveat here. When the Nuggets retired his jersey, Josh Kroenke, president or owner's son, whatever role he has now on the Nuggets, he named every player that the Nuggets have up in the rafters, and he said they just needed someone to pass the ball to. Pass them the ball. And that's obviously Fat. Like you mentioned, a triple-double machine. Obviously, I think Oscar said this, the Big O said this, that if we knew triple-doubles would have the impact that they have today, a lot of players would probably make it, not necessarily a priority, but would try a little bit more to, get a couple more rebounds, get a couple more assists, things like that. But Fat every night was a triple-double possibility. I think he's top 10, if I'm not mistaken, in the all-time list. Trails, I think, James Harden, if I'm not mistaken. So he's obviously up there in the top 10 all-time triple dubs. So like I mentioned, for those reasons that you mentioned and those couple ones that I just add on, he's my number 7.
Yeah, I was thinking he was either top 10, 15, somewhere in there. But I think, definitely top 2 when we're talking about Denver Nuggets, at least with the team, instead of just players that have played for them. But my number 7 on my list, and similar position to Fat Lever, and he's on the team right now. I'm going with Jamal Murray at number 7. And I was tempted to put him below because I'm thinking, Fat Lever, he does have a higher regular season peak than Jamal Murray. He's a guy that can basically do it all. But when I'm thinking about it more and more, even though Fat Lever has a higher maybe regular season peak, Jamal Murray is one of the greatest playoff risers ever. You know, even if it is a shorter sample size than like when you think of other great playoff risers like a Michael Jordan or like a Kawhi or something like that, you can't deny that this guy is elite when it comes to the big moments, and especially being such an integral part of winning the Nuggets' first championship. Like, you got to give him kind of like that extra bonus. I feel like that you couldn't give maybe guys like Fat Lever, and that for me is, see, the other thing is too, and I maybe would be more willing to like hear people out like with putting Jamal Murray higher, and obviously you haven't said him yet, so I'm sure I don't know where you're gonna put him. But my thing is like, you know, just everybody else that's above him, I feel like at some point they were like an MVP candidate type of player. And that's no disrespect to Fat Lever because he was an all-star multiple times, but I don't know if anyone ever saw him as like a true MVP candidate in a sense. Whereas like, you know, other guys that we're going to list on here, yeah, maybe they didn't have a true chance to win the award, but like they were that important to their team or that valuable to their team that I think you can make an argument like he is the true most valuable person in the league to an extent. And I just don't think you can make that argument with Fat Lever. And obviously Jamal Murray isn't that quality of player because, let's face it, even as great as he is, he's not the MVP on his current team, right? So that's just like where I come from. And I think just how important he was to the championship is going to give him that edge, at least over Fat Lever, in my opinion, that I had to make a late last-minute switch. So I had to put Jamal Murray number 7.
So I had to put Blue Arrow at number 6. You know, Jamal Murray, for all those reasons that you mentioned, you know, being, I'd say probably, like you said, the sample size is so small, but it's been so consistent as far as how he elevates his game in the playoffs. You know, even just the first time they went up against the Spurs in their first time making the playoffs with this team or with this core, you know, and then the following season he elevates it even more, and then the bubble, of course, you know, and then this season. Was the second most important player to be a part of the championship team. You know, probably was the reason. I don't know if he was the reason, but definitely he was the guy that put the nail in the coffins for the Lakers many times in the Western Conference Finals. You know, obviously had a triple-double with Jokic in the finals, first duo to do that. You know, he hasn't been an all-star, and the West has been stacked, obviously. You know, Jamal has also started out pretty slow. I think this season he will be an all-star. You know, just having that I guess that drive, you know, that adrenaline of winning a championship, and now he's playing for Team Canada here coming up in the World Cup, and then you know, he's going to be in prime shape, you know, because he's one of those guys that always starts the season out slower than others. You know, shooting slumps and whatnot. And then obviously last year coming back from his ACL injury. But I think just being on that high, that drive, that adrenaline, you know, just winning a championship and having a good summer, I imagine, you know, playing for his country. I think this is the year that we see him make an all-star team. And really that's probably the only allocate that he's missing that he can realistically, you know, reach. Because he's not going to win an MVP. Like you said, I mean, there's another guy that I'm sure we'll both mention down the line here that's going to always take that priority over him in that role. You know, but he makes a couple all-star teams down the line, maybe a couple all-NBA teams, and, you know, maybe he rises higher on both of our list. But like you said, having the biggest allocate that you can reach in basketball, you know, that definitely adds him to the top 10 in my book.
And for my number 6, I think it'll get us back on schedule, at least with our last 3 picks. My pick for number 6 is Dikembe Mutombo. And I mean, definitely when you think about blocks just in general, not even just for the Nuggets, but I think especially for the Nuggets, like you're going to think of Dikembe Mutombo waving his finger around. You know, just in a lot of ways, it's a little bit similar, I guess people could argue, to Marcus Camby with the role he had. I think he also was a more important offensive player. And he was also, in a way, the heart and soul on both ends of the team. You know, and Marcus Camby to an extent was as well. But I think you just, when you look at what Dikembe Mutombo did, being the first 8 seed, he basically, no one thought that an 8 seed could ever beat a 1 seed. And he did that against the Sonics in a year the Sonics were really good. And I don't think I'm wrong on this, but they were also the top 1 seed, like, of the 2 in both conferences. They were the best record in basketball. And to come out on top and take them down, like, that was just insane. And like you said, like when he's holding the ball, like he's holding the ball at the end, like right. So like that's just gonna be a staple in NBA history, and you know everyone's going to remember that for years to come, and we still do today. And I just think overall, like what he's left on Denver, even though you know Jamal Murray doesn't have the championship, and even though Fat Lever may be a more well-rounded player, I just feel like Dikembe Mutombo and what he did for Denver as of right now at his peak is probably a little bit better for my liking than what I would give for Jamal Murray and Fat Lever. Now over time, obviously Jamal Murray is still playing. He could end up higher on my list. Obviously Fat Lever is probably not going to happen unless I'm, you know, feeling a little bit different with the way I'm like valuing stuff. But that's kind of just like where I come from for Dikembe Mutombo. And I think it's similar to Marcus Camby. Like I said, offensively, I think he was a little bit more important. And he was like, even though Marcus Camby was blocking shots at a high level, I don't know if he was ever doing it the same way as Dikembe Mutombo. So I'm going to put him at number 6.
Yeah, no, like I said, when I brought him up, you know, he's probably the greatest defensive player that the Nugget had. You know, if you look at it, just his impact, you know, just being that defensive floor general. My number 5 is going to be Dan Issel. There's not really much you can say about Dan Issel that, you know, doesn't speak for itself. You know, he's, as far as just Nuggets, obviously he's a Hall of Fame player. He's a top 3 rebounder, top 5 scorer. You know, he was probably the best center in Nugget history up until some guy that we'll talk about here in a bit, I'm sure. You know, just the footwork that Dan Issel had, you know, talk about unathletic players. You know, he really wasn't the most athletic guy either. He's not going to jump over you or jump over a curve, to quote the great Stephen A. Smith. You know, so Dan Issel, another player, when you look at this, man, the Nuggets had a lot of great players, but not a lot of success that followed all of them. You know, obviously it took us 47 years to win an NBA championship, 49 if you count the ABA years, you know, and even 56 if you count when they were back at the Denver Rockets, you know, same organization as like I mentioned. You know, Dan Issel, you know, great player, the Iron Horse for a reason. That's going to be my number 5.
Yeah, and I guess this will be the first place that we straight up agree, because I also have Dan Issel at my number 5. And I gave him a slight edge over Dikembe Mutombo, mainly because I think he's a more prolific scorer on the offensive end. He also was with the team for a bit longer, and it is like, even though most of his accolades, I guess, came in the ABA, I think when they crossed over in the NBA, I think he only made an all-star team once. But it doesn't really tell the full story, because this guy was averaging like 20 points a game, like 7 or 8 seasons with the team. And he was like a high-level rebounder for about 6-7 years with the team. You know, he made important stretches for important playoff teams with them as well. That it's just hard for me to put anybody else there. And like you said, up until, you know, recent years, probably was the greatest center in Nuggets history too. But I feel like this is a firm spot for him. I feel like there's not, you know, I feel like everybody below him is definitely below him. Everybody above him is definitely above him. I think number 5 right now is where he belongs. And like we said about, you know, at least Jamal Murray, like he still has time. He could surpass him over time. But right now, I think Dan Issel belongs at that number 5 spot.
Couldn't agree with more. That's why we have them together at number 5. Man, my top 4 would probably fluctuate just as much as my honorable mention / top 10-9 spots do. Trying to think if I want to make any last moment changes, but I think number 4 is going to go to Skywalker, David Thompson, man. You know, this is another guy that was in that period from the NBA merger. You know, I don't know how many people actually know this, but he's the guy that the greatest of all time, Michael Jordan, looked up to. You know, not that many people know that. That's who MJ wanted to be. You know, so obviously Skywalker deserves to be in top 75, top 100 players of all time, maybe even, you know, dunking machine for a guard of his size, all-star, all-NBA player, Hall of Famer. I think the only thing that he was missing with the Nuggets was that championship. You know, like I said a little bit earlier, that a lot of great players, just not a lot of success, unfortunately, when we talk about rings. You know, but it's Skywalker. You know, it's the guy that MJ looked up to.
Yeah, I think that's a solid pick, and I think same thing here, where I kind of, especially with 3 and 4, I kind of went back and forth. I felt a little bit more confident with my top 2, but I think number 4, I'm going to go a different route and go with Carmelo Anthony at number 4. I think like, you know, a lot of the people today, you know, definitely are going to feel the impact that Carmelo Anthony left in Denver. However, there are still some fans that, you know, do not respect his decision to leave and go to New York, right? Especially at the time he did. So it's a little bit different. And while he did make the playoffs basically every year with the Denver Nuggets, I think only one of those years was the one that you can really stamp up to maybe actually contending for a championship, because they lost, like, you know, in the first round every other year. And really, even that year, as kind of like what you alluded to earlier with Chauncey Billups, I mean, he played such an important part on that team too, not even just for the playoffs, but in the regular season, getting them there too, because Melo missed a decent amount of games that season. And that's not to take away anything from Carmelo Anthony, because he still was, you know, one of the best scorers in the league, in just NBA history, and also just with the Denver Nuggets. Every year he was there, he averaged 20 points a game, and that was like, you know, 7.5 seasons worth. So I definitely can't understate that. I think in terms of, you know, skill, he definitely blows everyone out of the water below him, at least if you ask me. And, you know, also a high-level rebounder for his position. But overall, I think also when we're talking about Carmelo Anthony, I think most of his glamour will also go to the Knicks, specifically in the 2012-2013 season. I mean, that's because that's also where he wanted to be. And to me personally, it doesn't feel as much like he was a Denver Nugget as maybe these other three guys above him. So that considered, I'm probably going to knock him just a little bit and put him at number 4. But even though you might disagree, but I don't know.
So for all those points that you just mentioned, I'm actually going to knock him to number 3 in my spot. You know, like you mentioned, maybe the younger crowd thinks of Carmelo as a Knick. I certainly, I know people around my age, you know, I'm 29, think of him as a Nugget. You know, he's the one that brought basketball back to Denver. Like I said, right after the Dikembe leaves, the Nuggets are an irrelevant team. I believe the year prior to drafting Melo, they won 12 games. 12 games. Like, you know how many games you have to, I mean, like, that's just terrible, you know? So obviously coming in and bringing basketball relevancy back to Denver, you know, making the playoffs that first season, you know, and like I alluded to a little bit with Chauncey Billups, who knows if a couple things go a little bit different, a couple inbound plays go a little bit different, maybe he wins a championship with Denver, right? You don't know. But I just think the impact that he had in bringing relevancy back to Denver for basketball puts him at top 3. You already alluded to, you know, his success with making the playoffs each year. Granted, all of them first round exits. We forget how tough the West was, man. I remember one season, I think it was the 07 season, they won 50 games and they were the 8 seed. To win 50 games and be the 8 seed is absurd. You know, that just tells you how strong the West was with the Mavs, with the Lakers, with the Spurs. You know, even the Timberwolves had a great season right there with KG and things like that before he went to Boston. You know, so Melo definitely had his uphill battles. I did think about knocking him down a little bit for how he left Denver. Nowadays, it's just normal, you know, for an all NBA caliber player to request a trade or demand a trade, not even request a trade, right? Just straight up demand to be traded, and the team, you know, blind and get him out of there. So obviously Carmelo was probably the, I guess the footprint on how it should be done. You know, but to give him some props, obviously this is nothing that nobody saw when he got traded. The last piece of that trade was the pick swap with the Nuggets and the Knicks that eventually became Jamal Murray. That was the last, you know, trade piece of that Melo trade, right? So I'm not saying it had a direct part to play with it, with the Nuggets winning championship, but if that trade piece never happens, do the Nuggets get Jamal Murray? Who knows, right? Does he fall enough to number 8? I think is what they would have had as opposed to number 7. Do the Knicks take them, right? If they have that pick, I think it was 7 and 9 is actually what it was the actual swap for, if I recall correctly. You know, but is Jamal off the board when the Nuggets actually go up to pick? You know, things to keep in mind. But yeah, I have Melo at number 3.
Yeah, I guess even just to clarify, I guess, and maybe it's a little unfair in Melo's case, but I think like the way I see it with that is just not so much that people like look at him as a Knick, but I think also like just looking at him both as a Nuggets player and a Knicks player. I think just everyone else on my list, mainly because, you know, one of these guys has only played for Denver, and the other 2 guys basically played their entire career with Denver, and like basically their entire peak with Denver, I think it feels a little bit more right to elevate them higher on the Denver list, especially when I think there is an argument to be made especially with Melo and my number 3 guy. And now getting to my number 3 guy, it was your number 4 guy in David Thompson. I think just, every single year he was there, high level scorer and solid defender as well, which, we haven't really, I feel like we haven't named too many solid defenders, at least on the wing, like so far on this list, or on the perimeter, other maybe like, Fat Lever, I suppose. But he was definitely that as well. And also like a solid playmaker. The thing too about like David Thompson is, when he was with Denver, I think if you ended his career at the end of the time he was with the Nuggets, I think he would have like a top 10 or 15 scoring average, like an NBA history. Probably at that point, it would have been like top 10 because it was before the likes of like newer players like Kevin Durant and LeBron and, you know what I mean? So, and Kobe or whoever, right? So that would have also, I think, elevated him a little bit higher in people's minds. And just when I think of David Thompson, like I said about the Melo thing, I think of David Thompson. Yeah, he didn't play his whole career with Denver, but I don't really think of him as a Seattle Supersonic. I solely think of him as a Denver Nugget. And when we're thinking about that, I mean, this guy also, you could argue in the year Bill Walton won MVP, because, I've done like a lot of research on this as well, but you could argue maybe he should have been the MVP that year, or maybe even George Gervin. But I think with that considered too, at least for Carmelo Anthony, I don't think he was ever, had a realistic MVP case until maybe 2013. And that was when he was with New York. And really, I don't think he had much of it because LeBron got most of the votes that year. So when we're thinking about, though, David Thompson, like, you can make an argument that he should have won one that year. And if he has an MVP with the team, I mean, I only know one other guy that's won an MVP with the Denver Nuggets. And, obviously he hasn't been named yet. So I think he definitely should be somewhere up here considering all those things. So I'm going to put David Thompson number 3.
Yeah. I mean, I respect that, a little back and forth there, right, between those two players. I think for the last two, we should be in agreement. Maybe spoiler alert there. But for number 2, I'm going to go with the 80s all-time leading scorer, Alex English. Probably the household name that people think about when you think about the rainbow skyline, right, with Alex English, that number 2 iconic jersey. Like I said, right, the all-time leader scorer in the 80s, took the Nuggets to the Western Conference in 85, Hall of Fame career, up-tempo player for Doug Moe's offense, all-star, all-NBA player. There's not really much you can say about Alex English, just the way he controlled the game. And you mentioned Kiki, right, and how he could probably score a lot more points in today's NBA. Alex English is probably another of those guys that, could probably fit that bill to be a 30-point scorer in today's NBA, right? Just unguardable shooter, and just the way he attacked the paint and everything. For a guy his size, I mean, obviously he was a small forward, so he's not the smallest guys out there, but he's also not the biggest guy out there either. So number 2, Alex English, I'm gonna have to go with him.
Yep, and I got it exactly the same. I also have Alex English in my number 2. It's kind of interesting because, I know they didn't have quite as many deep playoff runs either. I think in the mid 80s, like 85, 86, they made a couple series as well. But at least for Alex English, like you said, he was there for like about 10, 11 seasons. And even in the playoffs, I know we talk, a lot about, Jamal Murray being a playoff riser and everything to that degree, and rightfully so. But I believe Alex English has played more playoff games over his tenure with the Denver Nuggets so far. And I know it hasn't amounted to a championship like Jamal Murray has or anything like that. But at the same time, like, just being in a Denver Nuggets uniform for that long and also elevating your game in the playoffs, which there's a decent amount of players who could be really great in the regular season, but it's only about those who, elevate their game in the playoffs. And playing that many games in the postseason and consistently, you're better in the bigger lights than the smaller lights too. I think that's something that should be considered. And like you said, leading scorer throughout the 1980s. He was a one-time scoring champion. So I got to give Alex English all the props as well, because, yeah, I mean, there's a reason why. Like, when I made my top 50 list a couple years ago, like, I had a top 50. I did not put him in there, but but I gave him a separate video saying this guy is my honorable mention. He was this close. He deserves some credit. So I'm gonna put Alex English at number 2 on my list.
And it's funny, not funny, but that you mentioned that he didn't make your top 50 list, but he made your honorable mention. It's a crime that he wasn't in the NBA's all top 75. When they made that team a couple years ago, right? I believe it was 2020, if I'm not mistaken, when it was the 75th year anniversary, if I'm not mistaken. He wasn't on that list, which is just absurd that the all-time leading scorer in the 80s is there, Hall of Fame player isn't on that list. Sorry, but I guess it is what it is. He definitely should be on there. But number 1, I mean, no surprise, right? I don't know if I catch it, but of course, number 15, Nikola Jokic. I mean, I can go on and on, reference the debate video that we had with the MVP last season with Joel as to why he's number 1 in all-time Nuggets history. But I think the moment he won that first MVP, he cemented himself as the best player of all time. He's definitely the biggest draft steal of all time, going number 41 during a Taco Bell commercial, right? Nobody even saw his name actually get announced. I think some raw footage has surfaced since then, right, of the actual announcement that the deputy commissioner made. But he's the biggest steal of all time. I think I'm not trying to even be biased, but I think you can make an argument for him being a top 20 player of all time. You can make that argument. 2-time MVP, Finals MVP, Conference Final MVP, 5-time All-Star, 5-time All-NBA, 3 of those being first All-NBA. Sure, he might not have any defensive accolades, but he's definitely not a liability like people say he is either. Just the impact that he had to bring the first championship to Denver. I mean, you can talk about Jokic all day, and like I said, right, he's no question the best player of all time in Denver Nugget history.
Yeah, I think the thing that separates Jokic from the rest is just not only the fact of the way he plays, because when we're thinking about guys like Alex English, who is a mid-range pro and everything like that, I mean, we have seen mid-range pros before. We have seen high flyers like David Thompson before. We have seen elite bucket getters like Carmelo Anthony before, but we've never seen quite a Nikola Jokic before. And along with that, just being first team All-NBA for as many years as he has, which I believe if you add up everyone else in Denver Nuggets history, I believe he has probably just as many or more than everybody else that has been a Denver Nugget. So that alone should just tell you okay, this guy is legit. Even if he didn't have a championship, if they didn't win the championship this year, I think you could still make that argument because like you said, 2 MVPs, there's not even anybody else with 1 MVP in Nuggets history. And maybe after the first one, I was a little bit skeptical to put him number 1 right away just because he'd only played about 5 or 6 years at that point. And I think the longevity, you could make an argument for Alex English. But once he won the second one, and even partly through that season, you could kind of tell that okay, this guy is the top Nuggets player, and there will no longer be a debate. And on top of that, bringing them to their first and only championship to date, and being the best player in doing so, because especially, and to bring up Jamal Murray again, Jamal Murray played insane in the playoffs, but to think of just how insane and how incredible Jamal Murray was, and he still wasn't the best player on his team throughout the playoff run, that should just speak volumes about how important Nikola Jokic actually is. And even I think everything you were saying about, you can make an argument he's top 20 or 25 all time. I mean, that's valid in my opinion. Even at this point, I know people think it's kind of early, just because he only won 1 championship. I mean, there are guys up there that have maybe only won 1 championship or in the discussion, maybe they won none. They never won a championship. But at the same point, it's how many players have you seen like this, just like Jokic, who could shoot from all 3 places on the floor, whether he's heavily contested or not? If he can defend at a high level, I'm not going to say he's Mutombo on the defensive end or Marcus Camby, but I mean, if you watch him, he can still defend at a high level, and I think people kind of sleep on that. And just the fact that he's the best passing big ever. Credit to Arvydas Sabonis and, my guy Joakim Noah, and there's a bunch of guys like that over history that are really good passers, but I don't think there's any that are as important as Nikola Jokic. So I'm right there with you. I got him at my top spot, number 1. He is Denver at this point.
Yeah, it's his city. I mean, it really is. It's his city. It's his state, you know, and I hope that he can be, he probably already is just because of bringing the championship, but I hope he can have a career similar to Tim Duncan, you know, with Spurs, bring a couple championships. Spoiler alert, I do have the Nuggets going back to back, you know, this upcoming season. Just the way he elevated his game and just being so consistent and the damage he did and what's left to be seen. You know, it's a guy that doesn't depend on athleticism, maybe like Giannis does, right, to get to the rim and dunk over people. His game is going to age like fine wine. You know, he plays at his pace. If you're running 100 miles per hour and he's running 5 miles an hour, he's still going to be the guy that gets the upper hand, you know. So like we said, right, top 20, top 25, we can make that debate when it's all said and done. Is he in the top 10? Hopefully. We don't know, right? He's a generational player. You know, there's just so many handful of players that are like that change the game, you know, from Steph Curry to LeBron to Kobe to MJ. You know, you can add Jokic on. Not saying that he's as good as those guys, or he has obviously the capacity to be as good as those guys, as I'm saying, but he's those type of players that change the game. Now you're going to see kids in AAU or, you know, up and coming drafts that, you know, play like him, that are a pass first player, but know they can take over and score over anybody when they need to, right, to take over the game. There's just so many things you could say about him.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say it's an exaggeration, because right now, like, at least as of the present day, I'm going to have to agree with you. I think so far the Nuggets are the favorites, again, going into next year. But, yeah, so I guess, you know, those are our top 10 lists. I guess before we go, do you have any other final thoughts about, you know, my list, and maybe anything like stood out to you that you agreed with, didn't quite agree with, or what do you think?
I think overall our lists were pretty similar as far as the players that we have on there. You know, maybe our top 10 was a little bit different at the start with some honorable mentions, and maybe that's just, you know, the memories of me when I was young and beautiful, as they say, right? Remembering quote unquote success, or at least those fun years growing up. So it'll be fun to, you know, look back at this towards the end of the dynasty, end of the decade, what have you, and see how much this list has changed. You know, but there's definitely potential for a lot of movement depending on how these next few seasons goes with the Nuggets.
It'll be good. But yeah, again, appreciate you coming out and doing the top 10 list. Let us know in the comment section below, like, did we miss anybody? Is there anyone we missed? Because, you know, I feel like we looked at just about every single Nuggets player, but I mean, at least, you know, I don't think Mr. Nuggets fan here would miss any, but at least for me, I might have missed a couple. So if that's the case, let us know in the comment section below. You got any other final thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
Nah, man, this has been a fun time talking. Always good to talk ball with you, like I say. We're close to the start of the season. I'm already, you know, gearing up for it, which is ironic because this off season has gone by super fast for me. You know, but we got the World Cup here coming up in middle to late August. And then, you know, September, October, start a training camp, and we'll see you in Denver raising the banner. You know, ring night, we'll be there.
Yeah, I saw your tweet the one day where it was like, man, the draft comes so fast after you're in the finals.
Yeah, I kid you not, man. I was like, it's already, you know, because I'm used to late April, you know, early May at the soonest, the season ending for the Nuggets, right? And, you know, I came back from the parade, and then it's like, hey, the draft's this Thursday. And I was like, wait, what? Already? Like the season just ended. You know, we got like a month and a half before the draft, and you know, I don't follow college ball that much, but I do some homework on, you know, some of the players coming out that are a realistic target for the Nuggets. You know, and I was flying blind, you know, for this upcoming draft because I had no idea who they could realistic target, who would be a good player, you know, because it just crept up on me. You know, playing until late June does that to you.
Yeah, and we'll see how you know, you guys did get some picks. We'll see how those guys do. I actually did get to see them in summer league. So that was exciting, but we'll see how you guys do again next season. And hey, in terms of this top 10 list, maybe this could be, you know, rearranged a little bit as soon as next season if the Nuggets do actually repeat, like you're predicting and like I am predicting as of right now. So again, appreciate you guys watching it through. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. But yeah, again, hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you guys for watching, and we're out. Peace.